You know, we don't get many Steven Spielberg films nowadays, and so whenever we do, it feels like a rare treat. And that's what it felt like when I went to go and see The Fabelmans at the cinema yesterday. But what did I think of the film? The Fabelmans. So The Fabelmans is Steven Spielberg's new film, which is inspired by his early life. And in the film, we see the fictional family of the Fabelmans. We follow their journey, and we see the relationships within the family and how they change over time. And also, we watch Sammy Fabelman, played by Gabriel Lebrel, I think that's the actor's name, who is pursuing this film career. We see him get obsessed with film, we see him start to make movies, and also we see his path into becoming a film director. And if you hadn't guessed already, Sammy Fabelman is basically a young Steven Spielberg in the film. And that's essentially the gist of The Fabelmans. And honestly, I really loved this film. I found it really emotional to watch. Because for me, it was kind of in the same vein, in the same sort of family as Richard Linklater's film Boyhood, where you're watching this person grow up over time, you're watching this family grow up over time, and even so, it's not your story. There's a lot of things in those stories, whether it's Boyhood or whether it's in this case in The Fabelmans, where you recognise a lot of it. It's not your story, but it could be your story at the same time, if you get what I mean. And that's why I felt like I was watching The Fabelmans. In fact, I actually kind of prefer The Fabelmans over Boyhood. I think Boyhood is a good film. I think it's a very good cinematic achievement, because that film was shot for like 13 years, and Richard Linklater made that film work. But the thing is, though, The Fabelmans for me, it's just... I'm a bit of a Steven Spielberg sucker, I'm not gonna lie. And I think that's why it works for me. Like, I haven't looked everything Steven Spielberg has done. I'm not a big fan of the film Always from 1989, which stars Richard Dreyfuss, Holly Hunter, and John Goodman. I think that film doesn't really know what it doesn't really know what it wants to be. It's quite unfocused at times. And also, I'm not the biggest fan of AI, artificial intelligence either. I don't hate that film. I just think it drags on after the first hour. I don't really get what it's trying to do. And so I haven't loved all of Steven Spielberg's films, but at the same time though, he has also made some of my favourite films of all time. Whether it's Indiana Jones and Last Crusade, which is probably my favourite film of all time. It's tied up there with Empire Strikes Back. Or, Jurassic Park, which is in my top 10 films of all time, which I just think is a perfect blockbuster. Or Catch Me If You Can, which I think is vastly underrated and so clever and so brilliantly directed and just an absolute masterpiece in my opinion. I love Catch Me If You Can so much, and he's made some other amazing films like E.T. the Extraterrestrial, Close Encounters of the Third Kind, Jaws, Hook, which over time I really come to love. Even so I didn't grow up watching Hook, I really come to love that film over time, fully enough. It's kind of a comfort film for me. Or the second Jurassic Park movie, which I have a huge fondness for, and the original Indiana Jones trilogy. I mean, not so much the fourth Indiana Jones, but you get the point I'm making. I love Steven Spielberg, and so I'm a bit of a sucker for him. So when I'm watching this film, I sat down and I was like, okay, it's a Steven Spielberg film, but it might not work for you. Some of your films haven't worked in the past for you, and that's absolutely fine. But I was like, okay, I was preparing myself to not like the movie. I wanted to like it very much, but I was preparing myself to not like it at the same time, because it's getting this awards sort of buzz, and sometimes when a film gets awards buzz, like Tao, which I released on this channel, sometimes it's not always for me. So I sat down to watch it, and I was like, okay, let's see what it's like. Let's see if it's self-indulgent. Let's see if it's too melodramatic and it doesn't work for you. And about 40 minutes in, I settled into the film and went, it's a Steven Spielberg film. No wonder it's working. It's kind of the same viewing experience they had with his remake of West Side Story, which came out in 2021, and that got nominated for Oscars as well. That got nominated for Best Picture as well, and I loved that film. It's one of my favourite films of 2021. It was kind of the same viewing experience with that, because when I saw West Side Story, I was like, okay, I've seen the original West Side Story, why do I need to see this one? Not really sure why he made it at all, but hopefully I have a good time with it at least. And then about half an hour into West Side Story, I was like, oh, it's Spielberg. Of course it's working for me. There's something about his direction, whether it's in West Side Story, the version of West Side Story that he directed, should I say, or The Fabelmans. There's just something about his direction which grabs you, and at the same time though it's captivating, it's gripping, and it's also emotional, and it's got that Spielberg magic in there. That Spielberg magic which a lot of people said was down to John Williams in his early career, where it was with films like E.T., Jaws, and Where's Lost Ark, and so on and so on and so on. But I don't always think it was. I mean, as much as the John Williams scores were amazing in those films, John Williams is my favourite film composer of all time, so I'm not discrediting him whatsoever. I do think E.T. would have been a very different film without John Williams. I also feel that Spielberg, there's just something about his direction which, when you're watching the film, you feel emotional, but you also feel uplifted at the same time. I feel you felt that with West Side Story, and John Williams didn't do the score for that film. In fact, it was the adapted score of Leonard Bernstein's score from the original West Side Story. And also, it's in this one, because even so you do have a John Williams score in this film, it's not as present as it is in, say, Hook, or as it is in, say, in Jurassic Park, or as it is in, say, any of the Indiana Jones films. In fact, it's much more nuanced. Whenever the John Williams score kicks in, it's effective. There's one scene in particular, which I'll talk about a bit later in the review, which really caught me off guard because of the way the John Williams score was used. But it's also very restrained, and I love that about it, because a lot of the magic of this film just comes from just the way Spielberg directs it, his nuanced direction. You know, it's not a film which has a huge scope. It doesn't have the same scope as, say, the first few Jurassic Park movies, or any of the Indiana Jones films, or Ready Player One, which I really enjoyed, by the way. But it doesn't need to either. It didn't need to have that scope. What I liked about the film so much, what I loved about the film even, was the fact of it was so small. You know, it didn't feel big, and because it was small in scope, it made you focus on the characters, and you could attach those characters. And the thing is, though, I saw myself and I saw my family in the Fabelmans characters. Like, those parts of the film when I saw, you know, my parents in Sammy Fabelman's parents, and those parts of the film when I saw myself in Sammy Fabelman. I mean, I'm not saying I'm ever going to grow up to be like Spielberg. No, that's a pipe dream, and that will probably never, ever, ever happen. But what I mean is, a lot of moments in the film with Sammy Fabelman, whether it's when he's getting bullied, when he's trying to pursue a hobby but it's not really working for him, or just his family life, and just a lot of moments in the film, you know, they felt like they really spoke to me, because those moments which have happened to me as well. You know, there's moments in the film where he makes his home movies and things like that, and I've done that on this channel. I've gone on holiday and I make home videos, and I come back and I present it to you guys. That's what I like doing. So there's moments like that, and also some of the family dynamic. Like, if you see in the film, you'll know that the parents' marriage, without giving too much away, doesn't go well. The parents of the Fabelmans family, played by Paul Dano and Michelle Williams. Michelle Williams plays the mother in the Fabelmans family, and Paul Dano plays the father in the Fabelmans family. By the way, is it Paul Dano or Paul Dano? I'm going to say Paul Dano for the sake of this review, but yeah, Paul Dano, who plays the father in the Fabelmans family. That marriage isn't the best as the film goes on, not to give too much away. And I'm not going into too much detail either, but a similar sort of situation happened in my family as well. And it actually was, at times then, a bit of an intense experience watching this film because of the moments like that, because of the similarities I felt. Again, there's a lot of things which are different to Sammy Fabelman's character and me. There's a lot of things which are not the same, but there are also a lot of things which are the same. And it's a personal film from Spielberg. I mean, actually, I should say, I got an introduction from Spielberg on the cinema. Not personal, like he came up to me and said, you know, have fun with the film. It wasn't like that. It was like he gave me a physical handshake or anything. What I mean is, he just popped up on the screen before the film started. In the cinema, by the way. Again, not like a screen on my phone screen or anything like that. No, he just popped up on the screen in the cinema and said, "Thank you for being here. Hope you enjoy the film." And I understand why he has, by the way, because the film bombed in America. It came out, I think, in November last year in the USA, and it didn't do well at the box office. So I bet he's quite happy that there's probably an audience going watching this film. And I was part of the audience. But yeah, there's just a lot of similarities I found with my life and the Fabelmans in this film. And I really, really liked it about it. I found it quite an intense experience to watch at times because of how familiar felt. Again, there's a lot of differences as well, but there's also a lot of similarities, and that's the things I want to focus on. And also, I should say as well, I knew a lot of this story going into the Fabelmans. I knew a lot of Spielberg's story, because even so, you know, I don't know Spielberg in any way. Of course I don't, I'm just a random nobody. But the thing is, though, I watched this Spielberg documentary, which came out in 2017, which, funny enough, is called Spielberg. Not the best name for the documentary. It should be called Spielberg, A Life in Movies, or Spielberg, the Movie Maker. Terrible titles, but better than the one that was actually decided on. But the thing is, though, yeah, I watched this documentary called Spielberg, all about Spielberg's life, you know, before filmmaking, then when he's filmmaking and everything, you know, that's happened with him posting his list, because I think that was quite a pivotal moment in his career and things like that. And I watched the documentary, and there's a lot in that documentary, I think you can get it on Prime, by the way, about his family and his mother and his father. And again, I don't want to go into details in case people haven't seen the film, but I knew where a lot of that story was going. I knew where a lot of that story was heading in the film. And even so, it does also feel a bit predictable in the film. You know, there's a storyline with Seth Rogen's character, which you can see coming from a mile away. And by the way, Seth Rogen's great in the film, but you can see that storyline with him. You can see where it's going from a mile away. Even so, there's moments like that, it was still effective. Even so, I knew the story. Even so, I knew what happened between Spielberg's parents. It was still effective in the film. It was actually really effective and really emotional, particularly towards the end. That's when it got more emotional with that storyline. So I knew the story. I knew it. And by the way, I should say that if you want to go and check out that Spielberg documentary, go. I highly recommend it. It's a fantastic documentary. In fact, it also would, I suppose, kind of serve of a somewhat sequel. It would kind of serve as a somewhat sequel to this film, to The Fabelmans, if you watched it now. I might go and check it out again because of how much I enjoyed it to start off with, but also, and how insightful it was, but also because, like I said before, it would serve as somewhat of a sequel because it does go into his life. And also, I want to talk about the John Williams musical score as well, because like what he mentioned, John Williams is my favourite film composer of all time, and his score for this film is perfect. I mean, I don't think it's as good as Justin Hurwitz's score for Babylon, and the reason I compared them there both, by the way, is because Justin Hurwitz's score is actually nominated for an Oscar against John Williams' score for this film. So Justin Hurwitz's score for Babylon is up against John Williams' score for The Fabelmans at the Oscars, and I do think Justin Hurwitz will get the Oscar for Best Score, but I'm very glad to see that John Williams was nominated, though, because his score, even so what he mentioned already, is quite restrained for a lot of the film. There's also moments where it's used really effectively. Like, I heard an interview from Spielberg and Williams recently, where Williams was talking about the fact that he was actually quite close to Spielberg's parents, at least to his mother anyway. I might remember that information wrong, and apologies if I am, but I heard that he was quite close to Spielberg's mother, and she would often come and watch the recording sessions when they're doing the score for Spielberg's films. As you can tell, I'm a bit of a Spielberg fan, if you hadn't guessed that already. I've already mentioned that, but yeah, you get the point I'm making. I heard about that, and that actually, the thing is, right, I listen to John Williams scores, especially for Spielberg films, especially whether it's Indiana Jones, Jurassic Park, and so on and so on and so on. I listen to a lot of John Williams Spielberg scores. When I'm listening to the scores recently, I'm starting to hear that a bit more. I'm starting to hear things a bit differently, because if you watch the film, and I don't know how well I'm explaining myself, I might be explaining myself awfully, I'm going to try and explain what I'm thinking right now. Basically, in the film, in The Fabelmans, you find out that Michelle Williams' character, who plays Sammy Fabelman's mother, who is essentially Spielberg's mother when you think about it, she is a famous piano player. She's a famous piano player. And apparently, she came and listened to many of the recording sessions when John Williams was doing the recording, was doing the score, was recording the score for many of Spielberg's films. And the thing is, like I said before, Spielberg's mum was a famous piano player, and you can kind of tell that John Williams is, you know, kind of, what am I trying to think here? What am I trying to say? You can tell that John Williams has an affection for her with his scores, because at the same time, also if you can have a phone going off there, because at the same time, though, basically, in a lot of the scores, you can hear piano parts now. Well, I could hear piano parts that I perhaps couldn't hear as much before. Like, there'll just be little piano solos within a score like Jurassic Park or a score like, I don't know, E.T. the Extraterrestrial, which I think he is putting in there, which I think John Williams put in there because of Spielberg's mother. Hopefully I explained myself well there, I'm not sure if I did. But yeah, there's a lot of that in this film as well. There's a lot of moments where it's just piano playing in the background. In fact, there's one moment in particular where the Fabelmans, the family, moves into a new house, and all you get, there's no diegetic sound, there's no sound in the world of the film. All you get is this non-diegetic score. All you get is a musical score playing in the background, and it's just piano. And it's so perfect though, because it's so effective. It's just this moment when the family is moving into a new house, and all you get in the background is this piano playing. But at the same time now, if any other music was playing in the background there, it'd be a completely different scene. But because the piano was playing, and because it was playing that a certain sort of way, and if you've seen the film, you probably know what I'm talking about. I'd be surprised if you didn't. Because the piano was playing in that sort of way, it was so much more effective, that scene. It was done masterfully, in my opinion. And the whole film was masterful as well. And yeah, I just loved John Williams' score for the movie. I also loved at the end as well, how it starts to kick in a bit more. Like I said before, throughout a lot of the film, John Williams' score is restrained. You don't have that big orchestral score which you get from John Williams in films like E.T. and Indiana Jones and so on and so on and so on, Star Wars, and even though it's not Spielberg, it's just another example of John Williams' orchestral musical scores. But the thing is though, the point I'm making is that the John Williams orchestral musical score that you're so used to hearing in films like Jaws isn't really used throughout the film. It's more just a focused piano, and the score itself sounds very small as well. But at the same time though, the score kicks in at the very end of the film when, not to go into too much detail, although you already know Spielberg's story, he becomes a world-class filmmaker. The score kicks in as you see a young Sammy Fabelman, which is essentially a young Spielberg, going in to the movie industry, going in to, I think it was Warner Brothers Lot. I might be wrong there, and apologies if I am. I have to watch the film again. By the way, I am watching the film again tonight, so I'm looking forward to doing that. But yeah, the score kicks in then. It was almost like, when the John Williams score properly kicked in, when the John Williams orchestral score properly kicked in, should I say, that was like, okay, this is Spielberg's journey beginning now. This is, Spielberg's journey beginning, and this is where he's going to find John Williams and have all this amazing success. And I don't know, that's just the way I saw the score. That's the way I heard the score in the film. And I love the way it was used. I don't think it'll win the Oscar for Best Score, but at the same time, though, I do love it though, and I can't wait to listen to score more on Spotify. But also on the topic of music, very briefly, the film also uses a lot of needle drops, which Spielberg doesn't usually do. I mean, he did it with Ready Player One, but that was kind of different. That was, I think Spielberg with that film was, trying to, present himself to a sort of newer demographic, perhaps a demographic which wasn't necessarily as familiar with him as the other demographic, as the older demographic. I think with Ready Player One, he was trying to accustom himself to a new demographic, a younger demographic like myself, and you know what? It worked in my opinion. Actually, I should say, sign off here, going a bit of a side note, going a bit of a tangent about Ready Player One. But the thing is though, I went to go and see Ready Player One with my mates in 2018, and they weren't excited to see it whatsoever, and they came out and they all loved it. So I just wanted to note that in there. It just shows you how good Spielberg is in a filmmaker. And we all knew that anyway, but still, wanted to say that because I thought it was a nice little story. But anyway, back to what I was saying. In this film, he uses needle drops, and what I mean by that is he uses like songs from the 50s and the 60s, and it also makes the period set in the film. I mean, it's not really a period film in the sense of like it's set in the medieval times or anything like that, but it is set in the 50s and the 60s, and it makes the setting feel more realistic. I mean, I think the way everything was shot on just the setting itself, I think looks fantastic. You believe that you're watching a film that is set in the 50s and the 60s, and again, on the surface, I've spoken about this many times in past reviews, that sounds like quite a small thing, but it's actually quite a big thing. And I think with the setting and with the aesthetic and also with the needle drops from songs from the 50s and the 60s used, it makes that setting feel more real. You feel like you are actually watching this film in 1950. I mean, it's not shot like a 1950s film, but you feel like you're watching this film take place during the time that it's actually taking place. And also, I think the performances are all wonderful. I think that Michelle Williams is fantastic. No wonder she got a nomination at the Oscars for this film. I also think Paul Dano is great as well. Very different than he was in The Batman. And this film technically came out last year. It came out last year in America, so that's quite a different range. Imagine going from The Batman to The Fabelmans. I mean, I don't actually know. Maybe it was The Fabelmans to The Batman. I don't know when each film was shot. But still, imagine going from one film to another. Because in The Batman, he plays, how do I say this? A psychotic serial killer. And in this film, he just plays a father who feels like he's losing touch with his family a bit. And so, yeah, that's quite a different range. But I think Paul Dano was great. And also Gabriel Labelle, again, I might be pronouncing that person's name wrong. I might be getting that name wrong completely. But Gabriel Labelle, who plays Sammy Fabelman in the film, I think did a great job. I really, really liked him. His acting wasn't over the top. And at the same time, though, it wasn't understated. I just thought it was perfect, because there's even times of the film when I can imagine Spielberg in those moments just because of the way Gabriel Labelle, I can't pronounce his name right, Gabriel Labelle played him. I thought he did a great performance. And also, like I said before, Seth Rogen was great in there. Judd Hirsch as well. He plays this sort of crazy uncle who pops up at one stage. By the way, Judd Hirsch is he's been nominated for Best Supporting Actor for the film. He's only in it for about 2 minutes, which is quite credible. The fact that he's been nominated for Best Supporting Actor, though. But yeah, all the performances were absolutely wonderful. And I think the film is just an absolute delight as well. And I really loved it. As for criticisms, I do have a few, though. At times, the film does feel a bit episodic. It feels like, oh, now it's the next part of Sammy Fabelman's journey. Now it's the next part of what's going on in the marriage and the Fabelmans. There's a lot of that in the film. There's a lot of, oh, it's the next part of this story. Now it's the next part of the story. It feels episodic at times. And perhaps it would have worked better as a TV show. Although, I was thinking about this last night, when I was jotting down my notes for this review today. I was thinking about this going, but Spielberg wouldn't have directed it, though, if it was a TV show. I mean, I know he's done some work on TV in recent years. Like, there was a report that came out a couple of years ago that he worked on some of the scripts for the Halo TV show, which I haven't seen, by the way. So I know he has worked in TV, but he wouldn't have directed this if it was a TV show. So we wouldn't have had that Spielberg direction, which is so brilliant in this film, in my opinion. So, you know, even though it does feel episodic, I didn't mind that it was a film. And also, now that I think about it as well, most people's lives feel episodic when you really think about it. You know, you don't have the same story that continues forever. You do something, you move on to the next. You do something, you move on to the next thing. You know, that's how people's lives work. And in the end, this is a film about somebody's life. So the fact that it feels episodic is a criticism, in my opinion. But also, it makes sense. It didn't hugely bother me. And also, at times, there was a couple of storylines which I felt weren't necessarily needed. I mean, I understand why they're in there, but they weren't necessarily needed. Like, there's a whole storyline with Spielberg, I keep thinking it's Spielberg. Sorry, Sammy Fabelman. There is a difference. But yeah, there's a whole storyline with Sammy Fabelman, and he's starting to date this girl. And I understand why the storyline was in there. I just wasn't sure if it was needed, to be honest. If you took that storyline out, I'm not really sure you would be losing much. Put it that way. But I still didn't mind that storyline. I just felt it was like, okay, do we really need this though? Do we need this storyline? And also, I said this before already, but I'm going to say it here again. I could see why the Seth Rogen storyline was coming from a mile away. But it was still effective. I'm just saying I could see where that storyline was coming from a mile away. And also, the end of the film feels a tad bit incomplete. I mean, Spielberg has often got criticism for the endings to his films, and I do feel the ending to the film was a bit like, oh, it's ended. You know, something happened. Quite fantastic last scene, by the way. I won't spoil it, but a lot of people spoiled it anyway. But I'm not going to in this review in case you don't know what it is. But the end of the film is great. But then it just kind of ends 30 seconds later. You're on this high after this great scene, and then it's like, oh, the film's ended. You know, and then it comes up directed by Spielberg in the credits. Are like, oh, that's it. Oh, I wanted to know when. And so the ending to me felt a bit incomplete. But then again, like I said before, so does many people's lives. You know, where do you end a story about someone's life? And also, you already really know where the story goes. You know spoiler alert, Spielberg became a world-class director. I mean, I know it's not Spielberg in the film, it's Sammy Fabelman, but it's Spielberg. It even looks like Spielberg towards the end. So you know where the story goes. So even though it does feel a bit incomplete at the end, in my opinion, I still understand why. How do you end a film about someone's young life? I don't really know. And now I think about it, the end of the film is good. It just, I think it could have been done a bit better. That's all I'm saying. But I still loved the film. I really did. I had such a wonderful time with it. And there's been a lot of talk as well that it's Spielberg's most personal film. In fact, when he came up on the cinema screen just before the film started, he said, "This is my most personal film." And I would probably say it is, by the way. I mean, I know a lot of people say that his most personal film is E.T. And by the way, just realised I got my E.T. Funko Pop there. Don't know how well it's going to show because of the focus, but still nonetheless. A lot of people have been saying that E.T. is Spielberg's most personal film. And although it is a very personal film, I can see how, you know, there's a lot of stuff in the film with Elliot and E.T. bonding, and they even got the same name, you know, Elliot, E.T. I heard someone mention that. A critic I admire mentioned that recently, and there's a lot of similarities when you hear about Spielberg's early life and when you see Elliot's life in E.T. There's a lot of similarities there. But at the same time, though, E.T. the Extraterrestrial, as amazing that film is, and it's an emotional film, and in my opinion, it's a perfect family film, as great of a movie that is, it also wasn't written by him, though. In fact, sign on here, trivia, it was actually written by Harrison Ford's ex-wife, and Harrison Ford actually filmed a cameo for E.T., but it was edited out. A little known fact. But anyway, yeah, it wasn't actually written by Spielberg. So, as personal for that film is, I do feel at the same time, though, it isn't, say, as personal as Close Encounters of the Third Kind. I actually think that Close Encounters of the Third Kind and The Fabelmans have a lot of big, glaring similarities. A lot of similarities that I didn't think of so much at first, but actually, the more I think about it, the more I can see the similarities between both films. And Close Encounters of the Third Kind was directed by Spielberg, and it was also written by Spielberg. He actually wrote the script for that film. He wrote and directed Close Encounters of the Third Kind, and a lot of the family dynamic in that film is also very similar to the family dynamic in The Fabelmans. And Spielberg was a co-writer in The Fabelmans. Tony Kushner wrote it as well. But at the same time, though, he also was a writer on it. So, in my opinion, I feel that Spielberg's most personal films are Close Encounters of the Third Kind and The Fabelmans. I feel that those are the films which are more about his family and more about his upbringing. Sure, E.T. is a personal film, and you can definitely see how. But for my money, I would say that Close Encounters of the Third Kind, especially with the storyline with the dad, now that I think about it, especially with Richard Drave's storyline in that film, I feel that it's more personal to Spielberg than to E.T. That's just the way I see things. And, like I said before, there's a lot of similarities between Close Encounters and The Fabelmans. And I'd probably say they're on the same par, by the way, because, now that I think about it, this is one of Spielberg's best movies. I don't know, maybe not. But bear in mind, you're comparing this to some of the best movies of all time, in my opinion. Like I said before, he's made my favourite film of all time, Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade. But also, you're comparing this film to films like Raiders of the Lost Ark, Temple of Doom, which has this huge love, which I adore as well, Jaws, Close Encounters, like I've already mentioned, E.T., Hook, which has this cult fandom now, Catch If You Can, but also Munich, and I mean, I don't think Munich's a masterpiece, but still, Schindler's List, which is an amazing film, probably a film I will never ever watch again, but it's an amazing piece of cinema. And then also Jewel, which was his first film, it was a TV movie, The Sugarland Express, which I think is another vastly underrated Spielberg film, which it came out the year before I directed Jaws, but also 1941. I mean, I don't think 1941 is brilliant, but still, you know, you're comparing this film to some of Spielberg's best films of all time, and it's not as good as, say, the Indiana Jones trilogy, the original, the first three Indiana Jones films, and it's not as good as E.T., and it's not as good as Jaws, and it's not as good as Jurassic Park, the first Jurassic Park anyway. But I would say for me it's on the same par as Close Encounters, and it's on the same par as his remake of West Side Story, which I adored, and it's on the same par as Ready Player One, which I also really, really liked, and it's on the same level as The Lost World Jurassic Park, which I understand is with most people, but I also love so much. It's another great Spielberg film in my opinion. It's not his best film, but it's another great film from him. And is it Best Picture worthy? Will it win Best Picture at this year's Academy Awards? I don't know. It might. In my opinion, I'd give it to it. But also, at the same time, though, Spielberg doesn't need more awards. There's been some talk about this film recently that apparently it's Oscar bait. And I never felt it was, by the way. I felt like Spielberg was just making a film about his family as a homage to his family. That's what I felt. But at the same time, though, I also understand why some people might say it's Oscar bait. Some people might see it's Spielberg preaching to the Oscars to give him another Academy Award or another Academy Award nomination anyway. And I can see that. I can see why people think that. But in my opinion, it's not Oscar bait. And I think people who think it is Oscar bait need to think about how many Oscars Spielberg already has. It's not like he needs more Oscars. And also, Spielberg's in his mid to late 70s now. I'm not actually sure how old he is, but, he's getting older. It's not like he needs the awards. It's just, whenever you hear all this stuff about, the Fabelmans has bombed as well. Like, he bombed at the box office. I'm like, well, yeah, but Spielberg doesn't need the money. You know what I mean? He doesn't need the money. He doesn't need the awards. So, if it wins Best Picture, that is fabulous in my opinion, because I love the film. But at the same time, though, if it doesn't, that's absolutely fine as well. The Banshees of Inisherin is an amazing film. The Banshees of Inisherin is so wonderful and just an absolutely brilliant film. So if that wins Best Picture, absolutely fine with me. If Everything Everywhere All at Once wins as well, I don't love that film, but I see the appeal of it, and I'd be totally happy with that as well. But if The Fabelmans wins Best Picture, that's great, and I do think it is Best Picture worthy. I've heard some people say, I'm not sure why it's nominated for Best Picture, maybe it's because the Academy likes Spielberg. The thing is, though, I would disagree with that, because I can understand why it's nominated for Best Picture. I can understand it because it's an emotional film. It's a personal film for Spielberg, but also to the viewers. And maybe it's not going to be for everyone for that reason, because I can see why some people would watch this film and like, I can't find anything to relate to in this movie myself. So, it's not going to be for everyone. But like I said before, I found it emotional. I found it exciting at times. And I found it, just to be an absolutely wonderful viewing experience. It's not one of Spielberg's best films, but that's also not saying loads, because Spielberg's one of the best filmmakers of all time. He really is. In fact, he's up there he is one of the best directors of all time. That's just no disputing about it, because of the amount of amazing films he's made. And I think The Fabelmans is nonetheless amazing as well. I loved it so much. I'm rambling on way too much, because just the more I think about it, the more I like it, the more I love it, in fact. The more it just... I can't believe how good it is. And I can't believe how much it worked for me as well, because I was a bit worried whether it would, but it did work for me so much. And I'm seeing it again tonight, and I can't wait to see it. In my opinion, it is Best Picture worthy. And so, all in all, I'm going to say that The Fabelmans, I'm going to say that it's a 9 out of 10. The reason I'm giving it a 9 out of 10 there is because I did think it was just an absolutely brilliant film. I didn't think it was perfect. There's only a few Spielberg films, which I say are perfect. So just saying that sentence there, like, there's only a few Spielberg films that I say are perfect. There's some directors which I'll never say have a perfect film. There's some directors which I don't think will ever make a perfect film, in my opinion, for my taste. But the thing is, though, Spielberg's made at least 3 films which I think are perfect. And that's saying a lot. There's some directors which I don't even think will ever make a perfect film. And there's some directors which, in my opinion, have only made 1 perfect film, like Francis Ford Coppola or Martin Scorsese. And, Spielberg's made 3 perfect films, in my opinion. And although this film isn't perfect, it's still pretty damn good. And all these people are saying, Spielberg, he's lost his touch now. He's not the same Spielberg he was in the 70s and the 80s and the early 90s. And, perhaps not. But at the same time, though, he's still pretty damn good. He's still better than most filmmakers that are working nowadays. And, when he comes out with the West Side Story remake and when he comes out with The Fabelmans, you do start to think that maybe, you were misjudging Spielberg a little bit. if you were saying that. I mean, I never actually thought that Spielberg lost his touch. You know, I loved some of these most recent films over the past 10 or 15 years, whether it's, you know, with Bridge of Spies, whether it's with the BFG that he directed, whether it's The Post, or whether it was with Ready Player One as well, or whether it was a West Side Story remake. You know, some of his more recent films, even though I don't love all of those, I still really like them. And the thing is, though, I don't think he's losing his touch. And I think that his work in the West Side Story remake from 2021 and his work in The Fabelmans just exemplifies that. I still think he's a masterful filmmaker, and that's exemplified in so many scenes in this film as well. Just the scene where he's recreating his old movies, and the scene in the assembly as well at prom, if you've seen the film, you know what scene I'm talking about, or the scene where they move into the last new house, or the camping trip sequence as well. It's just, there's so many moments in the film which are just so masterful, and you can tell it's Spielberg because of how brilliant it is and how beautifully it's shot, and the magic you feel in the film as well, and the John Williams score, which is so perfectly married up to the visuals, and I loved it. I really loved it. Also, this is an add-on, by the way. One thing I forgot to mention is how captivating the film is, and how engrossing it is, and how engaging it is. How did I forget to mention that? It's so engaging because of the performances and because of how small the film is. If it was bigger in scope, I wouldn't have felt as engaged as it as I did. The performances make it engaging as well, and the direction makes it engaging, and the dialogue and the way it's written, it's a beautifully written script. And so, yeah, I found the film so emotionally engaging and so captivating as well. Honestly, the film's 2 hours and a half, and it just flew by in terms of time because of how engaged I was by it and how captivated I was by the film. Can't believe I forgot to mention that. But yes, back to the review. And, you know, technically as well, it came out in America last year. So technically, this is a 2022 film. And would it have been one of my favourite films of last year if it came out last year in the UK? Yeah, it probably would have been. It probably would have been my top 5. I'm not saying it would have been number 1 or number 2 or even number 3. But it probably would have been my top 5. And that just shows you how much I love Spielberg. I've been rambling on about this film way too much, but if you didn't get it already, I loved it. I loved it, because, like I said before, it's an emotional film, and even though it's a personal film to Spielberg, he also made a personal film to us as a viewer. It's a personal film to me as well. And there's more, even though it's not your story, it feels like it could be as well. There's moments which you recognise in there, and there's moments which I recognise for me. And even though I haven't experienced a lot of what Sammy Fabelman experienced in the film, I have also had many similarities to his life. And I know I said this before, but I'm going to say it again, because I just love the film so much. I absolutely love the Fabelmans. I really did. And for that reason, I'm going to say that it's a 9 out of 10 from me. Anyway guys, what do you think of the Fabelmans? Please do comment down below and write your thoughts in the comment section below. Anyway guys, thank you as always for watching, and if you haven't yet, please do click down below and like and subscribe on this video, and look forward to many more both film and TVs coming very soon on this channel. See you guys again soon, but bye for now, bye!